The day I discovered that my wife had cheated on me with my own son was the day that everything inside me fell apart. It was many years ago, at a time when betrayals didn't come through text messages, but through exchanged glances, through silences that were too long, through gestures that we only realize when we've already lost everything. I was a simple, hard-working man. I lived with my son from a previous marriage. He was my pride, my hope, the reason I woke up every day. When I met Claudine, I thought I'd been given a new chance. A widow, kind, she seemed to have a peaceful heart. I fell in love with her with the naivety of someone who believes that life, at some point, will make up for the pain. We got married, and she came to live with us. At first, everything seemed fine. She treated Michel like an exemplary stepson. She took care of him, talked to him, smiled. I thought he was cute, even admirable, but over time it started to bother me. Little things, the way she laughed at his jokes, the way she put her hand on his shoulder, the way she looked away when I entered the room. But I denied it all to myself. I said it was all in my head, that she was just being a good stepmother. One day, I had to rush out to help a sick friend in another city. I came back unexpectedly, days earlier than expected. The house was silent. I entered slowly, and that's when I saw the two of them together, in my room, in my bed. They didn't have time to hide it. She looked at me as if I were the intruder. He didn't say a word. He stood there like a criminal caught red-handed, and I couldn't even cry. I just stood there, still, with a feeling of emptiness that never went away. There was no fight. There was no explanation, just a dull pain that stayed with me for decades. I never told anyone, not out of cowardice, but because I didn't know how to explain such an absurd, dirty betrayal. I kept living, pretending, taking care of the house, saying the least. But inside me, I had already died. Today I look back and only think about everything I swallowed in silence, because sometimes the greatest pain is not being betrayed. It is continuing to exist as if nothing had happened, and it was in that silence that everything began to fall apart, even if no one saw it. I haven't told you the worst part yet. There were things that hurt so much, that to this day I avoid remembering, but today I'm going to talk about it. Because maybe someone on the other side has already felt something similar, or worse. But I know that this story has already touched you and touched your heart, so leave your like here and subscribe to the channel. What I'm going to reveal here is a dark and painful secret that I've never forgotten, and today I'm going to share it with you, because what I lived, no one should live in silence, and this story is also perhaps a cry of despair. Maybe I can't keep this to myself anymore, and I need someone who listens to me and understands me. Can you do that for me? If so, stay with me until the end. The summer of 1972 arrived with a persistent dry heat. In that village near Lyon, the sun seemed in no hurry to set, and the nights brought little relief. The cicadas sang incessantly, filling the air with their constant hum. The windows of my old wooden house creaked when opened, letting in a warm breeze that did little to refresh me. Michel, my 12-year-old son, spent his afternoons in the garden tending to the plants with a dedication that filled me with pride. He was a curious boy, always asking questions about the world around us. I worked in the workshop at the back of the house, the smell of cut wood and varnish permeating my clothes. It was a simple life, but full of meaning. It was during a trip to the flower market that I met Claudine. She was behind a stall, selling lavender and roses with a gentle smile. Her green eyes had a sadness that caught my attention. We spoke briefly, and something about her touched me deeply. A widow, Claudine carried a serenity that contrasted with the pain she seemed to hide. Our meetings became frequent. She would come to my house, bringing fresh bread and sweets that she made with love. Michel quickly became attached to her, enchanted by her stories and attention. Soon Claudine moved into our house, bringing a new energy to our home. At first, everything seemed perfect. Claudine took care of Michel as if he were her own son, helping him with his homework, and preparing his favorite meals. I felt blessed to have found someone who would complete our family. But as time went by, I began to notice small changes. Claudine and Michel spent a lot of time together, laughing and talking in whispers. When I entered the room, silence quickly fell. She touched him with an intimacy that bothered me, but I ignored it, attributing it to maternal affection. However, doubt began to grow within me, eroding my peace. One night, I came home earlier than usual. The house was quiet, and as I entered, I heard muffled laughter coming from the kitchen. As I approached, I saw Claudine and Michel sitting side by side, their hands clasped together on the table. The look they were exchanging was not that of a stepmother and her stepson. I felt a chill run down my spine. I slipped back into the bedroom unnoticed, my heart racing and my mind in turmoil. That night, I couldn't sleep. What I saw wouldn't leave my mind. I started to look more closely, looking for other signs, and they were there, subtle touches, knowing laughter, awkward silences when I walked into the room. The pain of realizing that something was wrong in my own home was unbearable. I felt betrayed, humiliated, helpless, but I didn't know how to confront them. I was afraid of destroying the family I had worked so hard to build, so I kept quiet. I swallowed the pain and continued living as if nothing was happening. Today, when I look back, I realize how much of a coward I was. I let fear and shame stop me from seeking the truth, from protecting my son, from saving my family. And that guilt follows me to this day, like a shadow that never dissipates. They got along well, maybe too well. At first, it was easy to mistake that for affection. I saw how Claudine smiled when Michel came home from school, as if he were the light of the house. She baked him a cake every Sunday, ran her hand through his hair like a mother would, asked him about the cartoons he liked, laughed out loud at the lame jokes he told, and I would just sit there in the corner of the room, watching. It wasn't jealousy, at least not at first. It was a feeling that grew slowly, like an annoyance that we don't know where it comes from. But that doesn't go away. I started to notice small details, the glances that lingered for a second longer than necessary, the smiles exchanged when my back was turned, the way she fixed the collar of his shirt with a care that was too gentle, almost intimate. One time I walked into the living room and they were watching TV. Michel was leaning back on the couch and Claudine was lying with her head on his lap. When she saw me, she stood up too quickly. He pretended not to notice, turning the TV volume down. No one said anything. There was only silence, hanging in the air, like a newly discovered secret that no one had the courage to name. There was also the day I came home early from the workshop. The sun was still high, and the house was silent. I called out to them both. No one answered. I found Claudine in the kitchen, fixing her hair. She said she was resting. Michel appeared from the bedroom shortly after, a little sweaty, with his shirt wrinkled. They said they were cleaning the attic, but the attic was locked, and I didn't say anything, because I didn't know what to say. Meals started to get weird. Before, we would eat dinner together, laughing about the day's stories, talking about simple things. Now, I would talk and no. One would answer. Claudine would pick at her food with her fork, not eating. Michel would stare at his plate as if he were somewhere else. When he got up from the table, they would exchange a look. I could see it, but I pretended not to see it, because the truth was starting to hurt too much to say out loud. And then I started avoiding the living room, coming home later, inventing jobs in the workshop, just so I wouldn't have to be there, because there was something between them. Something I didn't understand, but that left me with a tightness in my chest, a fear, a premonition, as if my house, my home, my refuge was no longer mine. I never thought I would go through this, to be the outsider in my own family, to be the one who observes, who notices, but who no one listens to. And when you start to feel this, to realize that the silence between the people you love hides more than words, You start to lose yourself. The worst part wasn't even what I saw. It was what you felt and couldn't prove. It was seeing my son smile in a way he never smiled at me. It was hearing Claudine speak to him in a tone she never used with me. It was knowing deep down that something had changed, and that it might never be the same again. But the worst was yet to come, and I could already sense it. One night I came back early from a business trip. It was supposed to be the next day, but the client cancelled at the last minute, and I took the train back with the idea of surprising him. I got home around 8 o'clock. The village was quiet, as usual. The lights in our house were on. The garden was well kept, and the sound of a distant radio playing some old French music. It gave me a strange feeling, as if I were about to enter a place that was no longer mine. I turned the key slowly, so as not to make any noise. I wanted to see them without warning. I wanted to see how they acted when they thought I wasn't around. When I entered, I found the room empty. Dinner was on the table, 3 plates, but only 2 had been used. The pan was still warm on the stove. There was a different silence in the air, a dense, heavy silence. I felt a chill on the back of my neck, as if the air itself was pushing me away from there. I climbed the stairs slowly, treading carefully so as not to make any noise. The door to Michel's room was ajar. I saw shadows moving, hurried footsteps, low voices. Suddenly, everything went silent. Someone locked the door. I knocked once. Nothing. Twice. Claudine answered from inside, in a voice that was too controlled. "We'll be right down." We were talking. I didn't insist. I just walked away. But inside me, something had already broken. I went to our bedroom. I left my bag on the floor. I sat on the bed. Everything was tidy. The air smelled of lavender, and there was an open book on the nightstand, the same one Claudine said she read at night to fall asleep. When I bent over to hang my jacket on the hanger, I noticed something out of place. A small cardboard box had been pushed halfway to the back of the drawer. It wasn't mine. I'd never seen it there before. Shelter. Inside were folded papers, notes, little scraps of a story that wasn't mine. I picked up one of them, the first one. It was handwritten in neat, rounded letters. Michel, our love is wrong, but true. I feel guilty every day, but I don't know how to live without you anymore. When you touch me, it's like I remember who I really am. Your scent remains on my skin. Your voice still intoxicates me. I know he would never understand, but we understand. And that's enough. I love you. Claudine. I read it once, twice, 3 times. And then the paper fell from my hands. The floor disappeared beneath my feet. The room spun. It was as if the air had suddenly disappeared. I felt my stomach turn. Nausea rose in my throat. I ran to the bathroom and knelt in front of the toilet. But I couldn't vomit. I couldn't cry. I stood there, my face cold against the cold tile floor, trying to understand when everything had turned into this mess. My son, my blood, the person I brought into the world with so much love, to whom I dedicated every day of my life, and her, the woman I swore to love until the end. The one I brought into my home, believing it would be a new beginning. The 2 of them, together, in my corners, in my time, at my expense. At that moment, I wanted to disappear. I had no words, just images running through my head. The laughter, the touches, the silences, everything made sense now. Everything I suspected but didn't want to admit was there, on a truly dirty piece of paper. I stayed there, on the floor, for hours, until my body tingled, until my soul asked for a truce. But what does a man do when everything he is, father, husband, provider, becomes a joke in the mouths of those who should love him? I didn't make a fuss. I didn't scream. I didn't break anything. I just stood up, folded the letter again, and put it in my jacket pocket. And there, in that tight pocket, I also left what was left of me. To this day, I still hear her voice when I read those words. I still see Michel's look, as if he was challenging me even before he knew I knew. That paper, That paper killed me more than any disease could have, but that night, as hard as it was, I knew I had crossed a line. Nothing would ever be the same again, and no matter how hard I tried, I wouldn't be either. What I lost that day wasn't just a woman, it was my son too. After I read that letter, something inside me went out. It wasn't all at once, it wasn't explosive. It was like a lamp slowly going out when the oil runs out. I kept living, breathing, eating, working, but the Henri from before died that night. I became a ghost in my own home. My steps slowed, my voice lowered. I avoided looking Claudine in the eye, and every time she touched me, even if it was to hand me a plate or straighten my shirt, my body stiffened. She noticed, of course she did, but she never said a word. She never asked me what was wrong. She pretended nothing had changed, as if the pain that ate away at me was just another detail of the routine. Michel was still the same happy, lively boy. He got good grades from school, made jokes, and talked about the books he read. I heard him, but I didn't listen to him anymore. I saw his face, but I didn't recognize it. It was as if the bond between us had been cut from within. I started leaving home earlier and coming back later. Sometimes I didn't even come back straight away. I wandered aimlessly around the village, walking slowly along the cobblestone streets with my coat too tight around my chest. The neighbors waved and I waved back emptily. I no longer felt like talking, laughing, or taking part in anything. In the workshop my fingers trembled as I held the hammer. The wood was crooked, the pieces were poorly finished. A customer even asked me if I was sick, replied that I was just tired. How could I explain that my soul was sick and not my body? At home, dinners became short. I would sit down, eat in silence, and go upstairs to my room. They would continue talking in the living room. Claudine would laugh as if nothing had happened. Michel would talk about school, his friends, his life. Sometimes she would look at me as if she was waiting for me to say something. I didn't, because I had no words left. I avoided being alone with her. When I woke up, and she was still asleep, I would stand there for a few minutes staring at the ceiling, listening to her breathing, and I would think, how can she sleep like this peacefully, knowing what she did? How can she look me in the eyes in the morning as if she was still my wife? I started writing letters, not to send them, just to keep from going crazy. Letters that began with Michel, my son, and ended with tears that I pretended I didn't have. In one of them I wrote, "You were all I had. Everything, and without even knowing it, you swept me off my feet. But I never gave in. I never had the courage, because deep down, I still loved that boy. He was still my son. He was still the same boy who ran into my arms when he fell off his bike, who drew me a picture on Father's Day with the phrase, 'My hero.' And that hurt more than the betrayal, because losing a woman is hard, but losing a child without him even knowing, it's the kind of pain that has no name." Claudine went about her daily routine as if everything was in order. She took care of the house, the food, the flowers in the garden. Sometimes I would see her through the window, on her knees, planting lavender with the same delicacy as when I first met her. And I would think, what kind of person can hide so much inside themselves and still smile? One night she came into the room and lay down next to me. She didn't say anything. She just rested her head on my shoulder, and I lay still, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of her presence and the abyss between us. My body froze, my soul shrank, and there in the darkness I knew I would never be who I was again. I didn't scream, I didn't confront anyone, I didn't kick anyone out, I just faded away. I kept moving away until there was almost nothing left of me inside that house, and the saddest thing is that no one noticed. I spent years smiling at dinners, with the bitter taste of someone who was betrayed inside their own home. Life went on, as it does for those who learn to swallow their screams, and the worst part was not hiding the pain. It was having to act it out as if it didn't exist, as if I didn't know anything. Every morning I dressed like any decent man in that village. I shaved my face, put on my hat, went to the bakery and said good morning as if the world were whole. But inside, I was a wreck. I walked the streets with my spine straight, but my heart was bent with shame, anger, and hurt. Claudine continued her life as if she were writing a play and rehearsing until she believed in the role. She took care of the house, greeted her neighbors with a sweet smile, and helped with church parties. For everyone, we were the exemplary couple, the lucky widower who found a second chance, and the strong woman who started over with a good man. And Michel grew up. As a teenager, then as an adult. He brought friends home, invited colleagues for Sunday lunch. I never knew. I never suspected he knew. And I, even, though I was crushed inside, smiled in the photos, toasted with cheap wine and cut the bread as if it were whole. But nothing left as much of an impression on me as that Christmas. It was the evening of the 24th. The house was lit with candles and small colored lights that Michel had hung on the porch. The fireplace crackled slowly, spreading warmth and the smell of burning wood. On the table were chestnuts, homemade bread, and roast turkey. Claudine excelled on these dates. She wore a flowery apron, sang softly, and cut the fruit delicately. Michel brought a girl that year, the first girlfriend he had introduced to his family. They were lively, young, and smiling. He treated her with a care that made my throat tighten. I thought, did he learn it from Claudine, or did he inherit it from me? Everyone was laughing, toasting, eating. I was sitting at the head of the table, watching. I could feel the noise in the distance, as if I were inside an aquarium. I could hear laughter, but none of it touched me. The music was playing an old vinyl record, a French song that had once made me cry with emotion, and that night it made me cry inside. Claudine served wine, ran her hand over Michel's shoulders, laughed at his jokes. They looked at each other with complicity. It was no longer desire that hurt me. It was intimacy, the partnership, the lightness between them. It was the weightlessness in her gaze, as if she carried nothing. And I ate slowly. The taste of the turkey mixed with the wine was almost metallic. It tasted of bitterness, of abandonment. At one point, Michel raised his glass and said, I want to thank my father, Henri, who taught me what it means to be a man, and to Claudine, who taught me what love is. Everyone applauded. I smiled. I lowered my eyes. I swallowed the wine in one gulp. That night, when everyone had gone to bed, I was alone in the living room. The Christmas tree lights flickered slowly, casting red and green reflections on the walls. I picked up one of the glasses and looked at the marks Claudine had left on it. I ran my finger over the glass as if trying to figure out what had been left there. I sat in the armchair and stayed there until dawn, thinking about everything I was, everything I lost, everything I pretended. The house was asleep, but I wasn't. And on that silent Christmas morning I understood. My life was a play, and the role they gave me was that of the good man who never finds out. But I knew everything. Years, past, entire decades. Claudine was no longer with us, and the silence in the house had been the same since she left. A heavy, dense silence that didn't let you breathe. Michel would come in every now and then. He would come in with his hands in his pockets, with that air of someone who cares, of someone who tries to do everything right. And that, God knows, was what hurt the most. Because he wasn't a bad man. He was my son, my boy. But even children can break a father without realizing it. Or, worse, realizing it. I grew old among wooden planks, rusty nails, and letters never delivered. My days passed like clouds in a cloudy sky, unhurriedly but laden with things no one sees. And I grew old, bent not only by age, but by memory. By the memory of the letter, of the touches, of the looks, of the nights when they laughed softly while I pretended to sleep with my chest burning. And one day I looked in the mirror and saw that I was too old to keep quiet any longer. It wasn't anger, not anymore. It was tiredness. It was that feeling that if I died tomorrow, I would be taking a rotten secret with me, one that I never dared to say, and that weighed more than any cross that life had given me. The house was cold, as it usually was in late October. Michel arrived wearing a thick coat and brought bread and cheese from the city. He said he was going to make coffee. I just sat at the table and stared at the scarred wood, remembering all the times my hand had trembled there, holding back the anger, the tears, the desire to disappear. He talked about work, about his children, about the household bills that he could help me pay. And I just listened, and I thought, how can he live like this? How can he look me in the eye, bring me fresh bread and talk about trivialities without imagining that I have carried his and his mother's pain for my entire life? Until, after coffee, after the dishes were washed, after a pause that was too long, I said, "Michel." He looked, seriously, attentive, as he always did when I spoke with that tone he recognized since he was little. "You know what she did." His face changed at that moment. He didn't ask who. He didn't say, "What do you mean by that?" He didn't pretend. His eyes just froze. And there, in the silence between us, I knew he had always known that I knew. "I know that too," I continued, "and yet I loved you every day of my life." He lowered his eyes. His hands went straight to his face. And what came next wasn't just tears. It was an explosion of everything he had held back for years. He cried like a man who has finally faced his own abyss. He sobbed. He tried to speak, but he could only shake his head, as if denying what was already true. "I was young. I didn't know what was right, what was wrong. She made me believe that you didn't care about her anymore, that you were cold, that you lived like two strangers." I didn't answer. I just stared. Each of his words cut like a knife, but I listened like someone who needed to hear. "She said that you never looked at her the way I did, that between you it was just custom, but with me it was love. I was stupid. I was weak. And then, when it passed, when I understood, it was too late." "And why did you never tell me anything?" I asked, my voice firm but cracked. "Because I didn't deserve your forgiveness. Because I didn't know how to look at you and tell you what I did. Because, even though I was wrong, I loved you. I always loved you. But I thought I had destroyed everything." His tears fell on the table, mixed with the silence of that cold kitchen. And I just listened, because that was what I needed. To listen, to hurt, not to get revenge, not to point fingers, but to, who knows, put a stone on all that before death put one on top of me. "You never confronted me," he said, trying to catch his breath. "Why? Because you were still my son. Even when you killed me inside, you were still my son. And a father doesn't know how to stop loving, even when all that's left is just the shell." He raised his eyes slowly, as if carrying the weight of a lifetime on his eyelids. He looked at me in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. It wasn't the look of a grown man, a family man, an adult who came to visit me with the weight of his own responsibilities. It was an old look from a distant time. It was the same look of the boy who once ran into my lap after falling off his bike. The same. One who called me a hero with his mouth stained with chocolate and his eyes shining with admiration. But now, there was something broken there. There was pain, guilt, a kind of shame that words can't explain. I saw in him the child who once loved me with purity, and who later betrayed me with an unforgivable silence. I saw the son I raised with my own hands, erasing me with his own choices. He stood up, as if his legs weighed 3 times as much, as if each step toward me required a courage he had never had. He stopped in front of me, took a deep breath and hugged me. "You didn't ask for permission. You didn't say anything. You just wrapped your arms around me, a tight, suffocating, desperate gesture, a hug full of everything that was never said." I stood there still. I didn't raise my arms, I didn't respond, but I didn't pull away either, because this was all we had left. Two men too hurt to speak, too tired to run, and too proud to have forgiven each other before. A hug between two survivors of the same silent tragedy, a gesture that mixed love, guilt, fear, need, a son and a father who would never be whole again, but who, for a brief moment, allowed themselves to be less alone. He pulled back a little, his eyes red, his face sweaty with emotion. He looked at me with that same broken look and said, his voice trembling and wet, "She told me once that you never truly loved, that you only knew how to care. But today I understand that only those who choose to care truly love, even after being destroyed." The words came out of him like a confession, like a request for forgiveness without knowing if it would be accepted. And there, in that simple sentence, I felt a new, deep cut, but of a different kind. A cut that no longer hurt like before, but that exposed the raw flesh of what was still left inside me. I didn't answer, because there was no more answer inside me. No strength, no voice, just an immense tiredness, the kind that can't be explained by age, but by everything that has already been swallowed in silence. And there, in that silence, we stayed, two scars embracing. Maybe this is what love is, or maybe that's just what's left after all. Forgiveness does not change the past. It does not erase the letter I read, nor the looks I saw, nor the nights I slept next to a lie. Forgiveness does not restore me to what I was before that, nor does it give me back the years I spent representing normality. Forgiveness does not rebuild the foundations of the house that collapsed inside me, but it allows me to die in peace. It allows me to look at my son, now a grown man, and know that he carries scars too, that he also suffered, even if it was because of bad choices. It allows me to accept that life was hard, but that I didn't become hardened by it. It allows me to breathe without the weight of a secret that screamed for decades inside my chest. It allows me finally to look at myself without hatred, only with the exact pain of someone who lived more than he could bear, and still stayed. I was a father. I was betrayed. I was forgotten in my own home, and this is something no one sees. Because the betrayal that really hurts is not the one that makes headlines. It is not the one you tell your friends with anger in your mouth. It is the one that happens in the silence of the kitchen, while the coffee gets cold, and you pretend you don't know anything, so you don't break down in front of your own children. I was silent when everything inside me wanted to scream, when my chest burned with indignation, with hurt, with shame. But I kept quiet, not because I was weak, but because I was a father. And a real father chooses silence many times, because he knows that screaming can destroy the one he still loves. And I loved, even after the lie, even after the betrayal, even after each fake night. I loved. And that was what kept me going. I was present when they wanted me to be absent, when every word said seemed like a burden, when every gesture was avoided. I remained. The table was set, the bread was fresh, the chair was always in the same place, because it was my role to be there, because deep down I was still the pillar of that house, even when the house no longer supported me. I was the ground for those who knocked me down, support for those who weakened me, the shoulder for those who never dried my tears, the ear for stories that no longer included my name. And yet, I never stopped loving. I never stopped being a father as a father should be, whole even when broken, loyal even when betrayed, present even when they didn't deserve my presence. Because being a father, for me, has always been more than providing. It was more than giving orders or keeping the bills paid. Being a father was about loving without being understood. It was about enduring more than judging. It was about protecting, even from those who hurt me, and caring, even from those who hurt me most cruelly. Today, with these hands that no longer hold the glass without trembling, with these slow, shuffling steps through the corridors that were once filled with voices, and with this heart, not broken, but tired, more tired than sad. I understand what a father's love is. A father's love does not demand retribution. It does not demand recognition. It does not demand justice. A father's love just needs to continue existing, even if no one sees it, even if no one understands it, even if it hurts, until the end. I was a father. I was betrayed, but I never stopped loving like a father loves until the end, even with my heart torn apart, because deep down it was the only piece that was still mine. Telling this hurt, but hiding it for so long hurt even more. For years I carried a silence that crushed me inside. Today I spoke. Today you listened to me until the end, and that changes everything for me. Sometimes just being heard makes the pain weigh less on my chest. Comment here with the word courage. If you have ever swallowed pain alone, leave your like, follow the channel. Maybe someone else needs to hear this, just the way I needed to tell it. And if this story has already tightened your chest, then take a deep breath, because what comes next carries a pain that is even harder to bear. It is a story that gives you goosebumps just by listening to it, and that perhaps, like my story, you will also take time to forget. It will be a confession of pain, with twists and turns, and lessons that will change your life. Stay with me and click on the video that is appearing on the screen.